My father and stepmother lived rent-free in the house I inherited, but when they believed they had rights to it, I evicted them with the police within hours. Last week, I had to call the police to remove my own father from a house I own. That's how it all began. When I was 15, my dad remarried. My stepmother, Margaret, tried too hard to be my new mom. She was always around, asking about my day, my friends, and my hobbies. He bought me clothes I never asked for and decorated my room without my permission. I later found out this was because he barely spoke to his own daughter about his previous marriage, which is saying something. My dad just stood there, watching this happen. He never intervened when I told him I needed space. After 3 months of this, I couldn't stand it anymore. I asked my grandfather, my dad's father, if I could move in with him. Grandpa Murphy had a large house with plenty of space, and he agreed immediately. He was a retired judge, and had always been the most sensible person in our family. I suppose his profession gives him those powers. My dad didn't put up much of a fight. He seemed relieved that there were no tensions in his new marriage. Living with Grandpa Murphy was great. He gave me space when I needed it, but was always available when I wanted to talk. He taught me about finance, property management, and the law. These lessons proved incredibly valuable later. When I was 17, Grandpa Murphy suffered a heart attack and passed away unexpectedly. In his will, he left me his entire inheritance, including the house we lived in together, 2 rental properties downtown, and a considerable sum of money. I had no idea he planned to leave me everything, but now I understand why he taught me about all those things. My dad was furious. He claimed that he should have inherited the property, since he was his grandfather's son. But his grandfather's will was irrefutable. He had even recorded a video explaining his decisions. In it, he said he was leaving everything to me because he believed I would be responsible, unlike my father, who had borrowed and lost large sums of money over the years. This is where things got weird. Instead of me moving back in with my dad and stepmother, they decided to move into the house I had inherited. They claimed their house was too small, even though I'd lived there before. And since I now had this big house, it made sense for them to move. I was still 17, so I didn't have much say in the matter. However, I set 2 clear conditions. They were not to enter my bedroom or my grandfather's office. Those rooms contained personal belongings that I wanted to keep as they were. The house had 4 bedrooms in total, so they still had plenty of space for themselves and a guest room. When I turned 18, I went to college in another state. I continued to allow my dad and stepmother to live in my house rent-free. I only returned during vacations and some weekends, which suited me fine. I paid all the property taxes and maintenance costs. I never asked them for a single cent. Then, when I finished my studies, I moved to an apartment closer to the center. I thought they were house sitting for me. This arrangement worked for 6 years, until last month. I got a call from my dad while I was at work. He told me I should clean my room because they were going to convert it into a nursery. I was confused and asked him why they needed a nursery. She explained that my stepmother had reconnected with her daughter, Lisa, who was pregnant and homeless. They had invited Lisa to move into my house. I reminded her that they were guests in my home and had no authority to make those decisions. He argued that my room was the only one suitable for a nursery because the guest room was too small. I pointed out that they could have asked me before inviting someone else to live there, especially since Lisa could have used the guest room until they found another solution. My dad raised his voice and said I was selfish because I didn't live there anymore and could have been more generous. I reminded him that Lisa couldn't be my family because I'd never met her. Then I firmly told him not to touch my room or my grandfather's office, or I'd evict them. I suggested they move back into their house if they needed more space. I think I was pretty clear. My dad was silent for a moment before saying they had sold their house years ago. That same afternoon, my Uncle Jack, my dad's brother, called me. My Uncle Jack and my dad hadn't spoken in years due to a business disagreement, and he hadn't been around much of my life because of it. He told me my dad had called him complaining about my threat to evict them, which I thought was odd. My Uncle Jack suggested I reconsider and not kick my dad out. I told him I'd think about it, but I'd already made my decision. The next day, I called my lawyer. She had been Grandpa Murphy's lawyer and had helped me manage the property since I inherited it. I asked her to accompany me to the house so I could formally serve the eviction notice on my father and stepmother. My lawyer agreed and suggested we go early in the morning to avoid a scene. We arrived at the house at 7 a.m. the next day. I tried to open the door, but my key didn't work. My dad had changed the locks. I knocked loudly until my dad answered. He spoke through the closed door, saying he wouldn't let me in until I changed my mind about the nursery. I told him I had come with my lawyer to handle this properly, but if he didn't let me in, I'd do it my way. He still refused. My lawyer and I went straight to the police station. As we were walking to the police station, my Uncle Jack called me again. This time, his tone was different. He told me my dad had called him again, asking him to convince me to step back. My Uncle Jack told me he was tired of my dad's manipulative behavior and would support whatever decision I made. At the police station, Donna explained the situation. Since she had all the documentation proving I was the owner of the house, the police agreed to escort us back. When we arrived, the officers informed my dad that he had to allow me access and that they were being evicted for changing the locks without permission and denying me access as the owner. My dad tried to make himself look like a poor victim when he said he had nowhere else to go. He claimed they had lived there for years and that they had rights. He even tried to claim that Grandpa Murphy had verbally promised him the house. The officers asked him if he had any documentation to back up his claims. He didn't. The officers explained that, as the legal owner, I had the right to evict them, especially since there was no formal lease. I hired a moving truck to help them move, but I did so in my father's name. They only had their bedroom furniture and personal belongings to move, as most of the house's contents belonged to me or Grandpa Murphy. My stepmother cried the entire time, while my dad kept telling the officers that this was all a misunderstanding. Lisa stayed in the background, looking uncomfortable. I noticed her pregnancy was barely visible. After they left, I immediately called a locksmith to change the locks again. I also installed security cameras around the property. I thought this would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A month later, I was out of town for work. My girlfriend, Ellie, was staying home to watch her. My dad showed up unannounced. When he saw Ellie, he thought we'd moved in. He told Ellie that since we were living comfortably in the house, we should welcome him, Margaret, and Lisa for next Christmas. He gave her a list of meals he hoped we'd prepare and gifts they wanted. Ellie told him to leave immediately, or she'd call the police. He left, but not before telling him I was an ungrateful son and that I'd regret treating him that way. I thought that would be the end of it, but 2 weeks later, my dad called my mom. They hadn't spoken since their divorce 16 years ago. He invited her to spend the holidays with his family at my house. My mom declined, and instead offered to take me and Ellie on a trip to Italy for the holidays. When my dad found out about this, he called me demanding that my mom pay for him, Margaret, and Lisa so they could go to Italy too. When I refused, he came to my house again, insisting that either my mom include them, or Ellie and I should pay for their trip. His behavior was so ridiculous that Ellie and I laughed until he left. I've since changed my phone number. I've also given my tenants at my other properties a photo of my dad and instructed them not to let him in under any circumstances. I hope this is finally the end of his sense of entitlement, but knowing my dad, I doubt it. Update 1: after my last post, things went quiet for a while. My dad didn't try to contact me again, and I started to think maybe he'd finally gotten the message. Ellie and I continued with our plans to spend the holidays in Italy with my mom. Before we left, I asked 2 friends who lived nearby to check on the house periodically. They reported that there was no sign of my dad and no disturbances. Italy was amazing, and I have to thank it for that. We had a private tour of the Vatican, ate at amazing restaurants, and stayed in beautiful hotels. Ellie and I even discussed the possibility of moving to Europe one day. It was the most relaxed I'd felt in months. Then, on December 28th, while we were having breakfast at our hotel in Rome, I received a call from my Uncle Jack. He sounded frantic. He told me he was moving out of state immediately and needed to sell his house as quickly as possible. He didn't explain why he was in such a hurry, but he asked if I was interested in buying it. His house held special meaning for our family. In fact, it was my great-grandparents' house, where Grandpa Murphy grew up. Grandpa had given it to my Uncle Jack years before, but he later told me he regretted the decision before he died. Grandpa asked me to try to get the house back someday, and if I succeeded, to give it to my cousin Maria. Maria is my Uncle Jack's daughter from his first marriage. My Uncle Jack never acknowledged her as his daughter and refused to pay child support. Maria lived with her mother in another country, where she was born, and always struggled financially. Grandpa Murphy had kept in touch with Maria and helped her whenever he could. He wanted her to have the family home as a way to make up for the way my Uncle Jack had treated her. My Uncle Jack had no idea that I knew about Maria or was in contact with her. If he had known, he probably wouldn't have offered to sell me the house. I decided to use his desperation to my advantage. I offered him 75% of the house's market value, paid in 3 installments. He rejected the offer, saying it was too low and that he wouldn't be returning to the city. I countered with a better offer, the same amount, but paid in full upon my return from Italy on January 3rd. I also offered to cover all legal fees and moving expenses. All I had to do was have my things packed and the documents ready when I returned. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. He and I shortened our trip by 2 days and flew back. The transaction went smoothly. I paid my Uncle Jack. He signed for the house and left town the same day with his new wife. The next morning, I called Maria and told her to come to the United States as soon as possible because there was something important Grandpa Murphy had left for her. She arrived 3 days later, and I gave her the keys to the house along with some money to help her settle in. Maria needed to stay for several days to handle the property transfer process and apply for a visa that would allow her to move permanently. During this time, she stayed with him and me. One night, while we were having dinner at home, my dad showed up again. It turned out that my Uncle Jack had been planning to sell the house to my dad. My dad had asked for a few days to raise the money, and was furious when he learned I had bought it instead. My Uncle Jack, wanting to avoid a confrontation with my dad, simply told him I had bought the property and left town. My dad assumed I had bought it for myself and decided to claim it. When no one answered his knock on the door of my Uncle Jack's old house, he broke a window and let himself in. What I didn't know was that the house had a doorbell camera that Maria had installed. We saw the break-in on Maria's phone and called the police immediately. Since the break-in was taking place in an upscale neighborhood, the police responded quickly. They arrived at the house and found my dad inside, searching through closets and drawers. He was surprised when the police told him the house belonged to Maria, not me. They arrested him for breaking and entering. With the help of my lawyer, Maria filed charges against my father. Due to his previous behavior at my house, changing the locks and refusing to let me in as the legal owner, the judge denied bail. He is currently in jail awaiting trial and could face several months in prison. After my dad was arrested, I investigated to find out why my Uncle Jack had been in such a hurry to leave town. It turns out he had borrowed a significant amount of money from his wife's brother for a business that failed miserably. When he couldn't repay the loan, his brother-in-law threatened him with legal action. My Uncle Jack decided to sell everything and skip town rather than face the consequences. I texted my uncle to let him know that if he ever tried to contact my dad or cause any trouble for Maria, I would tell his wife's family where he was. He responded by blocking my number, which was fine with me. I don't expect we'll hear from him again. Maria is considering keeping the house and moving permanently to the United States, although she doesn't know the legal paths to doing so. He's here now on a tourist visa, but since he was born outside the country, he has the option to apply for citizenship, but it's not automatic. Update 2. My dad's trial was last week. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison for breaking and entering, plus an additional 3 months for the incident at my house, when he changed the locks and denied me access. The judge was particularly harsh because my father showed no remorse during the trial. He maintained that, as my father, he had every right to enter the property that he believed should have been his from the beginning. My stepmother, Margaret, approached me outside the courthouse after the sentencing. This was the first time we spoke since the eviction. He told me that Lisa had moved out a few weeks ago after they were evicted. Apparently, Lisa wasn't actually pregnant. She'd lied about it to get sympathy and a place to stay. I should feel bad because when I saw her, I thought it was showing, even a little. Margaret and my dad had been living in a motel since the eviction, and their savings were almost gone. Margaret asked me if I would consider letting them move into one of my houses once my dad was released from prison. She promised they would pay rent and respect my boundaries. I told her I now had tenants in all my properties and that there were no vacancies. Besides, he wasn't that crazy. Although that wasn't entirely true either. He had an empty rental unit, but he had no intention of letting them live there. Margaret started crying and asked if I could at least give them some money to help them get back on their feet. I walked away without responding. The next day, I received multiple calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My dad somehow managed to call them from jail and told them I'd made them homeless out of spite. Most of these relatives didn't know the whole story and quickly judged me. I blocked their numbers one by one. One call I answered was from my grandmother, my mother's mother. She had received a letter from my father demanding money. In the letter, my father said I had stolen his inheritance and left him destitute. My grandmother wanted to hear my side of the story. I explained everything that had happened, including the fact that my dad and Margaret had lived rent-free in my house for 6 years. My grandmother told me I was right to send him to jail then. Maria moved into my Uncle Jack's old house last month. She's adjusting well to life in the United States and has already made some friends in the neighborhood. She invited Ellie and me over for dinner to thank us for helping her. During the evening, he showed us some old family photos and documents he had found in the attic. Among them was a letter from Grandpa Murphy to my Uncle Jack, written just a few months before Grandpa died. In the letter, Grandpa expressed his disappointment in both sons and explained why he planned to leave his inheritance to me instead. It mentioned that my dad had borrowed more than $100,000 over the years and had never returned a cent. It also wrote that my Uncle Jack had stolen money from Grandpa's business when he worked there briefly in his 20s. The letter made it clear that Grandpa believed neither of his two sons was financially responsible. Maria gave me the letter, saying I should keep it in case my dad tried to contest Grandpa's will again in the future. I didn't tell her that I had already found similar letters in Grandpa's office years before. Grandpa had been very thorough in documenting his reasons for decisions about his estate. Last week, Ellie and I went to see the empty rental property I mentioned earlier. It's a small house that needs some renovations before it can be rented out again. While we were there, we discovered someone had been living in the house without permission. There was a sleeping bag in one of the rooms, along with food wrappers and dirty clothes. The lock on the back door was broken. I called the police, who arrived and searched the property. They didn't find anyone at the time, but they took a break-in report. That night, they called me to inform me they'd caught someone trying to break into the house. It was my stepmother's daughter, Lisa. She admitted she'd been living there for several weeks after running out of money for a motel room. She'd gotten my dad's address before he went to jail. I decided not to press charges against Lisa, on the condition that she leave town and never contact me or my family again. She agreed and left the next day on a bus to another state. I hired a security company to install better locks and an alarm system in all my rental properties. Update 3: My dad was released from jail last week. I found out because Margaret called to inform me. She said my dad wanted to meet with me to clear the air and start over. I turned her down. He then mentioned that they were still struggling financially and asked again if I could help them. I told him that 6 years of free housing was all the help they'd get from me. 2 days after his release, my dad showed up at my workplace. He walked straight through reception and found me in the conference room during a client meeting. He made a scene, talking loudly about all the problems of the last few days. Security had to escort him out of the building. My boss was understanding, but suggested I work from home for a while in case my dad returned. That same day, I filed for a restraining order against him. The judge granted the order based on my dad's behavior after his release from jail. The order prohibits her from coming within 150 meters of me, my home, or my workplace. Maria has settled completely into her new home. She's found a good job at a local company and has made friends in the neighborhood. He invited Eli and me to his housewarming party last month. The house looks completely different. He's renovated it beautifully, keeping some of the original features that meant so much to Grandpa Murphy. Eli moved in with me permanently, and we're considering buying a house in a different neighborhood. Although I love Grandpa's house, it now holds too many negative memories. We're looking for properties closer to downtown, where we both work. I plan to keep Grandpa's house as a rental property. It's in a desirable area and should generate good income. As for my other properties, they're all rented out to reliable tenants now. I raised the rent slightly to cover the cost of the new security systems, but I'm still keeping it below market value. Several of my tenants are friends or colleagues who needed affordable housing, and I'm happy to help them. My Uncle Jack tried to contact Maria a few months ago. He claimed he wanted to reconnect with his daughter and make amends for the past. Maria didn't respond to his messages. Later, she learned through a mutual acquaintance that my Uncle Jack was in financial trouble again and was probably looking for a place to stay. Maria changed her phone number as a precaution. My mom suggested I speak with a financial advisor about setting up a trust for my properties. This would provide an additional layer of protection should my dad ever try to claim any of them. I met with an advisor last week and am in the process of setting up the trust. Grandpa Murphy would have approved this step. He always emphasized the importance of protecting assets. Margaret filed for divorce from my dad last month. She contacted me to inform me not to make any demands. She apologized for her role in everything that happened and said she realized how toxic my dad could be. I didn't respond to her message. While I don't wish her ill, I no longer want any connection to that part of my life. The holidays are approaching again, and this year, Ellie and I are hosting Thanksgiving at our house. We've invited my mom, Maria, and some close friends. It will be the first party in years that I'm truly looking forward to. I began this journey when I was 15, seeking refuge with my grandfather. Now, at 25, I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people I choose to have by my side. Update for you may not recall that in my update 1 to 2, which I also don't remember where, I told my uncle that if he started bothering me again, I would tell him where the people I owed money were. I didn't even know exactly where he'd moved, but I knew exactly who I could ask to find out. Sorry, I'm not going to say who because that would be like shooting myself in the foot. That's what I did, and it got him in trouble. There are reasons why the brother-in-law didn't try to contact his sister or my uncle after what happened. First, because he wanted to forgive his sister for this. Apparently, his brother-in-law has money, and it wasn't a huge amount he lent him, at least not by his standards. But he also knew that tracking him down and suing him wouldn't do much because he thought he was bankrupt. But giving him the information seems to have stirred his desire to do something for him, because he went to see him in person and show my uncle his fist in his face. I don't feel sorry for him. I warned him. He also told his sister that if she chose to stay with him, she would be in a lot of trouble. Not even his wife knew much about my uncle. She didn't know the house belonged to him. She thought I was renting it to him or giving it away for free, like I had my father. She also didn't know I had bought it from him. Now the brother is suing to recover the money. Because, although any business can go wrong, my uncle didn't use the money for what he said he would. My uncle tried to sue him for his assault, but nothing worked. The case was dismissed, although I don't know the exact details. Now I don't know if my uncle's wife already knows the whole story or not. Maybe she did, and never decided to tell her brother. But with everything that's happening, it would be difficult for her to continue living in the dark. Oddly enough, I haven't had any contact with my father since. As for him and me, we found an apartment near downtown, better than the one I lived in before, and we've moved in together. I've already read your comments about signing a prenuptial agreement for my property and everything my grandpa Murphy left behind, but it's still too early for that. We're not talking about Goddard. Plus, it's something the lawyer herself suggested. Not to mention my grandfather, who has prepared me for all these legal matters. Update 5. I still haven't heard from my father in all this time. I don't think I should be worried, but I'm just mentioning it for those who keep asking about him. No, this update is to talk about my uncle's divorce and also the lawsuit. The two things that have primarily taken the money he got from his house. I think it's fair, because in the end, he didn't get anything from something that belonged to Maria in the first place. I'm glad I was part of the Karma team and helped. For starters, his wife's brother won the lawsuit and recovered his money, plus other expenses, interest, and attorney's fees. While I know his wife divorced him, but who knows why? There are so many things she could have divorced him for. We could assume it's because of all this that happened, things he hid, either because she found him with another woman, and we're assuming wrong. Or maybe my uncle went bald. I haven't seen him in a while, and that made me unbearable. Maybe we'll never know. So that's all I have to tell you guys right now.